I'm going to take these popsicle sticks and I'm going to place them on this wing to simulate where I want these ribs. I've made little dots every inch, so I've got a reference of where I'm at. So I'm just going to go the TLAR method. I'll lay these things out. So this is just a way to duplicate the top and the bottom. I want the top rib pattern to match the bottom. So I made this little template here and tape together here. Make sure it matches down here. Quick to make, it's out of C-temp. So here's another quick test run. It's got the soldering iron with a depth stop on it. It's just 440 with a blind nut, and I shaved the blind nut down so it matches the head of the 440. So what I'm trying to do here is establish the right depth, and I'm trying to get, oh, I don't know, 1/4 inch or a little more. So let's see, I got a piece of wood here it's like a fat 1/4 inch, 5/16. So with this depth, I could go a little bit deeper than that, and I will. I mean, a little bit thicker on the rib, because what I want to happen is when I cut these grooves in this wing, I want this balsa wood to sit proud, and I'm going to sand it flush. So once it's glued to the spar and the trailing edge, it'll stick up a little bit, and then you just go through there and that's how you establish your shape of your rib. Alright, so we're going to start melting some grooves in this foam. I'm going to hold this little Formica straight edge next to the line. I'm going to use the line as the center of my cut. Okay, so I just got a groove in there. So I'm going to add another rib between these two. This is where I want my sheeting. I'm going to put another rib right here because that's where the fuselage is. So I wanted to transfer the load from the side of the fuselage to an actual rib. So I'll cut another notch here. Now the soldering iron tip hadn't been modified, with the exception of the little stop I put on it, the depth stop. It's a 440 with a blind nut that's been cut down on one side to allow me to run it at the right depth from either side of the rule. Now this little strip of material I'm cutting against is countertop material. And Formica's, for template material, sort of finicky because sometimes it's not flat. And being really thin and not flat can be to your advantage on something like this because you're actually conforming to a shape. So this might be your best bet, countertop material for actual rule for the cutting of these rib slots. Now what I like to do is I go back and chase it with a little 3/32 balsa stock to make sure that I get all the fuzz and little plastic meltaways out of the groove. That way I'll make sure my my balsa ribs will sit flush there. And I'm going to go through here and also pay attention to this little point of contact for the rib. I'll pluck away little beads of styrofoam right here that didn't quite melt. I want to make sure I have a good clean surface for my rib to glue to. And the same back here. Now you can see right here this slot goes all the way through, and that's a good thing because what I want when the ribs go in is I want these ribs to actually glue together, not only at the trailing edge but to each other when they come together. And the beauty of this rib slot is it doesn't matter which orientation you make these slots. Once you glue that wood in there, sand it flush with the top of your foam, you got a perfect representation of your airfoil. So you're not plotting ribs or cutting ribs really, you're just, it's like an I-beam, you're cutting little strips and gluing them in the slot. So I'm going to go get my little duplicator. I'm going to make 4 ribs to go in these slots. So with this little duplicator, I make sure that all the pins are flush. And I come over here, flip it, line this up to the spar, and I hold this thing at the end so that way I'm not interfering with the pins. I just push down ever so gently, and right there is my profile of the wing airfoil. So I'll flip this over, and what I'm going to trace out on this piece of wood right now is going to be the bottom of my rib. And then I'm going to make it extra thick. I'm going to come up here like this. And really the rib will only be probably that deep, but making it extra thick gives you something to grab a hold of if you need to take it in and out. So I'm going to make these a little extra long. Of course the trailing edge is right here, so I'm going to sort of do an I-beam thing here. I'm going to cut 4 at once since they're all the same size. And each time you move a slot to a different rib location, you have to replot it, but the way this is going to work out, they're all the same. Now if this was an I-beam wing, you want to make sure that you had a template, so you get consistent ribs top and bottom. Reason being, the bottom part of the I-beam rib has to go over the spar, the top has to maintain your airfoil. So on an I-beam it's critical, but here, since basically this rib is floating in that foam, it's all good. So there's my 4 ribs. So I just hand sand these. A little finesse when it comes to setting up the angle there. You know, this is going to be 90, pretty close to it. I'm going to come down here on the trailing edge, and what I do, I don't mark it with a pen or anything, I mark it with a knife. So I'll lay this up against the trailing edge on the inside, push the rib up to the spar, and that's my mark. And what I like to do here, I like to cut it fat, and I like to sand to that mark, which is just a nick from the X-Acto. And I'll stay a little fat from that mark just to fit it. And see, now it's still a little fat. Hit it with the sanding block. And I eyeball it and look at it. One of the things that it's really important when you do woodworking, and nobody really talks about it when you want a perfect joint, it's called sneaking up on it. And what I mean by sneaking up on it, you don't try to hit your mark, you cut it fat. And by doing that, you end up with a really nice, tight, snug fit. You don't want it so tight that it's going to distort anything, and you don't want it so loose that it's not going to make a glue contact. Now here with this 1/4 inch trailing edge, you can see this rib here. And what I want to do is sand just a little flat spot on it, so when this top rib meets back here, it's actually glued to the corresponding rib, opposing rib. So I'll put a little flat there, stick it back in the notch, and see that it gives me a nice little flat there. So I'll do the same thing here. I'll get this trued up at the leading edge. This will be the leading edge. It's hard to tell the difference between the leading and trailing edge on these ribs. A little bit of waviness there. It might be beneficial to mark these, leading and trailing edge. Come back here, lay the knife against the trailing edge, push the rib down on it, leaves me a mark right there. I'm going to cut it fat. And I can still see that little mark, the little tick mark from the razor. Now I sneak up on that as I fit it. And right there's the fit I want.